Yo, what's up, y'all? Today we have an awesome guest, and I think you guys will really enjoy the conversation. We have Akshita Iyer, who is the co-founder and CEO of Ome. You can find them at omekitchen.com. We talk about her time on Shark Tank. We talk about raising money broadly. We talk about running, a pretty complex business, a hardware business, as a first-time founder. And there are some questions that I ask that are more so for me, as an Indian American. Uh, they're a little bit self-indulgent, but I think I think a lot of the cultural context, in particular, like for me as an immigrant, um, that I operate in, and like informs how much of an identity or how much work matters to me in my personal identity, and how much of that is just like a cultural vestige. You want to sort of make sure that you're honoring the sacrifice that your family uh, made to come to a new country and build a life so you can have basically limitless opportunity in this country. So I ask her about that, and I ask her sort of about some of the pressures that are common in Indian families, and probably typical in immigrant families in general. Um, I think you guys will dig that. It is a little bit indulgent for me personally because I think about those things a lot, but I think they make for um, great TV and great podcasts. So uh, I hope you guys will like it. In fact, I'm confident you guys will dig this one. I had a lot of fun doing it, and reach out to her and check out her business. All right, thanks y'all. Take care, and see you guys on the other side. Hey, fellow Desiwala entrepreneur, we're
Love
going to
it.
get you some shine. Yeah. Did you know that you were going to be an entrepreneur? Is that something that you sort of like grew up as a child wanting to be, or like how did you come to running your business?
Absolutely not. Never once thought about being an entrepreneur, what it meant. I mean, I not because anyone forced me, but I think just culturally, I just was like, oh, I want to be a doctor. And
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought about anything else. And again, not because someone told me you need to be a doctor, but everyone else is becoming a doctor. So I said, okay, fine. I guess this is what I need to do. And I think in theory, I always wanted to, as cliche as it sounds, help people, right? And I think the doctor route made the most stable sense. And so, I went through probably middle school, high school, always planning to be pre-med. And then I went to Duke for undergrad specifically because of their, pre-med program. But then also they were the only university at the time that had a neuroscience department where I could do research. And so everything was really always focused towards, that med school path. And I think when I was getting to the end of my time at Duke, I just didn't feel the level of passion and excitement about, med school and eventually practicing medicine that all of my friends had. And I decided at that time, maybe it's a good idea to just get some work experience in the grand scheme of things. If I take a few years to, make some money, I can always go back, right? And I will say that even though I never thought about being an entrepreneur, my dad started a small business when I was very small. So I think I'd always been around it. And I'm sure that, subconsciously did play a role. But I think that did definitely play a role when during those few years where I got some work experience. I worked at the hospital, started a program for Duke athletics at the time. I just started to think about starting something, right? I started to watch a lot of Shark Tank. I got very inspired by all of these people who didn't have your traditional engineering, product development, business, ex Apple, Google backgrounds,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
building solutions for their own problems. And I was like, that was honestly the first time, Teja, where I was like, wait, maybe I could do something, right? I don't have maybe the right background, but maybe you don't need it. And so I was already in that frame of mind when my mom left the stove on one too many times and started a kitchen fire. And so I kind of stumbled into being an entrepreneur, though I think it took me some time to realize that I was an entrepreneur because I had a personal experience that I really needed to solve for my own family around, cooking at home. And I'm sure you can relate to how critical and important the kitchen is, right? We spend like all of our time there. And when we had
Yeah.
this experience, my mom stopped cooking. There were all these ripple effects. And so I was like, hey, I think I could build something. How hard can it possibly be? And I just dove right in. And I think over probably 2 years, I realized that, wait, I'm actually building a business here. And then I started to think about, well, who do I need around this table to actually teach me how to build this business? But I never intended this to get this far, never intended to ever call myself an entrepreneur, and didn't even realize I was an entrepreneur until a lot further than you would have expected.
I mean, you have like an awesome pedigree. You went to Duke, and I feel like that's sweet. So your product, like, it has so many components: a hardware component, a software component. You have to understand like things about cooking and about like the actual user experience. How did you acquire like all of this different information? Because you have to hire for these roles, right? Like, how did you do that?
um, by trial and error. I mean,
Yeah.
I really, Teja, thought when I had this idea for a smart knob, right? And it came from all of the other retrofit smart devices that we have, right? Your smart door locks, doorbells,
Right.
thermostats. The idea was that you've got an appliance that lasts 10 to 15 years, which makes it really hard for appliance manufacturers to get connected technology into the kitchen just because it's a long purchase cycle. And so I always thought, hey, all of these other smart home devices are retrofits. So how hard can this possibly be? Honestly, the thought was you need some plastics, you need a motor, you need a board, you put it all together, you put it in a box and you ship it. Like that's how easy I thought it was. And so I think only when I started to actually build it, right? And by build it, I don't mean myself. I had to find engineers locally, contract engineers, not even full time, because I didn't have the resources, or I had not raised any capital at the time
Mm.
to, hire anyone. But with whatever savings and whatever paycheck I was getting, and of course family too, I just started piecemealing this. I found some product development firms, and it was a very good in hindsight, but very challenging learning experience, because the thing about, hardware is you can't recoup that cost, right? It's not like writing a piece of code or a line of code and then just going and editing that code, right? You're spending thousands of
Mm.
dollars prototyping, and you don't get that money back if that prototype doesn't work. And
Mm.
so it again took about 2 years for me to work with contract engineers to learn enough about engineering concepts at a high level to then go and hire our first, who ended up being a firmware engineer. And it was during that 2 years where because I hadn't raised outside capital, that I had the time and the flexibility to make those mistakes, right? Because it was just me, and I wasn't really I didn't really have any obligations, to report to anybody in the sense that you do once you raise any kind of venture funding. But it took me some time to figure out who we needed to build this. And then after we went through an accelerator and I raised our first round, then I brought on our first hires. And I'm glad it went that way, because I didn't know what I would have been hiring for if I hadn't kind of, tried and failed a few times.
So, okay, so the first kind of part of the journey was like kind of equipping yourself with the ability to kind of scale the right team members and
Yeah.
bring on the firmware engineer. I mean, what did you study in school? Were you
Uh,
in engineering? Pre-med.
no, neuroscience. So
Okay, gotcha.
on paper,
Gotcha.
this makes total sense. Obviously, I'm building kitchen tech.
Well,
Yeah,
no, I mean, it's incredible though, because like you have to basically absorb a whole
yeah.
space, and then you have to find the best people in that space to like build your thing for it to be awesome.
And 99% of the things that I tried during that time were failed, right? And so,
That's normal.
but I needed, right? I mean, you need all of that to then know what you're doing. At least I know what I'm doing a bit better than I did, 4 years ago. So it's worth it. Yeah.
Was the capital raising experience similar? Like, did you have resources that you can lean on to find out, hey, okay, what are the terms? What's standard? Or was that kind of just you just went through it and figured it out as you went?
Yeah, practical experience, and just trying and figuring it out along the way. Though I will give credit where credit is due to founders that I met during this process and over the last 5 years who would give me these tidbits of advice that I was able to also absorb at the same time. But then I did have to just kind of learn on my own, read all of your venture books that you can think of. And when I started, because I came from the pre-med medicine world, I didn't have any direct connections in the startup or venture space. So again, it took me some time to find the person who knew someone who then could get me to the right person. And it took thousands of meetings for me to find the right people. But then in that time, those 1,000 meetings gave me an opportunity to tell my story, and I was able to refine a lot by the time it actually was showtime, when I got in front of the people who ended up investing in us. But that was a huge learning curve too, because I was talking to B2B SaaS investors when I first started, not knowing that this person would never invest in me. But
It, it's such a desi thing though, to like where like you're about to leave the house and your mom is like, "Did we
oh
turn off the stove?"
yeah,
It's like that is my entire childhood. Even today, before I leave the
yeah,
house, I'm like, "Hey, did we turn this off?" So
yeah,
I totally get the. I mean,
yeah,
it's like I feel the problem. I understand it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, and so you went through Shark Tank. How was that? Was it is crazy? Was it fun?
It was very fun. I think, it was full circle because I started this company and really got the courage to start something because of the show and because, of all of these people that, Shark Tank was highlighting that were really building very practical solutions for real pain points, right? Not just technology for the sake of technology. And so it was crazy that, it kind of came full circle where Shark Tank reached out to us and said, "Hey, you've got something interesting." And that's really, I think, all it was, that, there's this neuroscience grad who should not be building this, but she is. And so it's like, makes for good TV, right? And I think the show itself is actually very organic, in a sense that first 30 seconds when you give your pitch is the only scripted part, right? The rest of it is a dialogue and is a conversation. And I think, I came in with a lot of experience already, having met so many people who were asking me all the questions that the sharks ended up asking. And so I think because of, the previous year of just diving in and just pitching anybody and everybody who would listen to me, it did give me a good foundation to put my best foot forward on the show. And I think that paid off. We did get an offer. We didn't take it because it just wasn't the right deal. But I'm also glad we didn't take it, because even at that time, this was still the bootstrapped phase. And I really still did not know what it truly meant to build a business. We had not made our first hire yet. And so if I had taken that money then, I think it would have just gone down the drain, because I would have used it in the same way that I was using it, without having any kind of structure to, the business and milestones and KPIs. And so in hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't take it, because then it gave me more time to go and learn from the people who've actually gone through this. And so I think all in all, it was a really great experience, and also gave us the visibility. So until then, this was a problem that, as you said, I thought was, maybe, all of us Indians or people who cook often. Like, I didn't know that it was such a widespread problem. And so because
Yeah.
of the show, I heard from thousands of people about the applications of this technology, not just around peace of mind and safety, but in terms of true cooking automation, right? Especially nowadays, we're looking to smart home solutions to automate our daily routines. And so it did give me a much wider perspective on what we could do in the long run, which, as you know, when it comes to startups, it's not just about what you can do today, but are you building, this as as a stepping stone to building other services. And so I think that was a big benefit of the show, was just the magnitude of what we were building. And actually, I think was the first time I thought about this as a true business and raising money for it. So,
What are some of the stories that you heard? Do you have any that you remember in particular?
oh yeah, I mean, we have quite a few. So, there was a gentleman whose mom, a lot of our core our target demographic right now are middle-aged adults who have young kids. A lot of stories of people's kids turning the knobs on. In fact, my nephew is here, and for the first time, I was like, "Oh my God!" Like he's actually turning, the knobs on. And so we've got that. But then what we also saw, and a lot of the stories that I heard were about aging family members, and it kind of also came full circle for me because I started this for my own parents who want to stay at home, who want to stay independent, but cooking is one of the first things that becomes difficult. And so, there was one gentleman I remember whose mom had left the gas on. And so, and the gas was spewing for almost a day, I believe. And when he came in, he smelled it, but she hadn't smelled it. And so, even something as
Wow.
simple, as that this technology could have prevented, I think, has made all the difference for me in just building something of value, right? That people are actually, seeing benefit from. So
That's sick. It's like preventative medicine,
yes.
actually. Like you're like stopping people from inhaling gas. That's
Yep.
insane.
Yeah, and I think that's we've got a lot of reactive solutions, right? You think about your smoke detector. Everyone should have a smoke detector, but it goes off after it detects smoke, right? So by then, you probably have a fire and something's already big. So for us, it's, can we be more proactive before something happens, right? So, and I think that's a bit of a different approach that we've taken in terms of other solutions out there. And I think that makes a difference too.
Every entrepreneur I've spoken to like has an opinion on hiring, scaling a company. Like, is there a right way to do it? What's your take on just like bringing on the right team members? How do you think about it? What are some things to look for? What books have you read that you like that talk about it?
Yeah. There's definitely not one way to do it. I think there's no right answer. It depends on your industry too, right? As you mentioned earlier, we've got hardware, we've got software,
It's crazy.
firmware. I mean, it's a very complex, system. And so I think the biggest thing for me is hiring people, one, who really take pride in their work, regardless of what work they're doing, right? That everything that they put out, they are proud to say that they built that, right? And I think some of our employees that have been here the longest are like that. But then two is you want people who are passionate about something, right? It doesn't necessarily we do have some people on our team who don't love to cook, right? But they're passionate about solving problems, right? You want to see that. I think someone can have a passion about something because I think, when times do get tough, you want to know that there's somewhere that they can dig deep, right? I mean, obviously you want people who are technically capable, right? But I think even more than that is, you're going to have, do you have people around the table who, when times get tough, and they will, right? When it comes to startups and, you're going to be, short on payroll one time, or you're going to, have to lower salaries, or, I mean, there's a variety of things that
Totally.
could happen. And you want people around the table who are willing to support you through that, right? And who also have faith in you. So I think those are high level, some of the things I look for. When it comes to actual technical talent, I ask people who are way smarter than me on, is this the right experience that I'm looking for? And then the next step for me is culturally, do they fit? And so I know that, I've learned over time what my weaknesses are, and that is definitely on the technical side, but I know enough to be dangerous and to ask at least high level the right questions. But then I do have people on our team who can then vet further and make sure that we're hiring people who are experienced enough, right? So that, we don't have to handhold, and people can be pretty autonomous. Everyone on our team is, pretty much on their own, and they have the experience to be able to do that.
So what do your parents think now that you're like a CEO, you're scaling basically like a sick business?
Yeah.
Are they like, you should go to med school, or are they pumped?
Not med school. I think, when I started, I told them,
They're like, you need to get married. That's what they're saying probably now.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually get an MBA is what my dad's saying. I'm like, I think I already have one. I think just practically, I think I already have one. I don't know if I need one now. No, I mean, I think to be fair to them, they were very supportive. And, I think my dad, having started his own business and having the flexibility, early on in life, to do that, I think has also made a difference too. But I think now they are very proud. I think and I do share a lot with them because I think, they've always wanted to grow with me. And I think this experience from beginning to now has been a learning experience for my entire family, not just me, because, they see me on my highest of highs and my lowest of lows. And I think, what's very important, and I think sometimes we forget this as kids, is that your parents, if you don't always have to share the best of times with them, right? And
Yeah.
I will say that growing up, I would only tell them the good things, right? I never really told them anything that was going wrong.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
But I think as an adult, obviously our relationship has grown and evolved.
Yeah.
But sharing with them when things go wrong, and then them seeing how I figured it out or helping me to figure it out, I think makes all the difference. And it does take a village, right? They say it takes a village to raise a kid. It takes a village to build a company and to grow as a founder, as an entrepreneur. And I think because of that support and guidance sometimes too, I think that's the only reason I'm still, kicking now. So I think initially, to answer your question, they were a bit hesitant and were reassured by the fact that I could go to med school if I wanted to.
Totally.
Like I had all the requirements, and I told them, yeah, I can always go later. But I
Yeah.
think very quickly within the first year or two, I was like, I'm not going. I was like, my skill set is so much more catered towards business. And what I also realized too is that there is a way to make an impact even in healthcare by not being a doctor, but you could do it on the business side. I mean, a healthcare innovation nowadays, I mean, it's just scratching the surface. And so, I think they have come to accept that I'm not going to med school, but I think they're curious to see what I do after this, because there is no set path, right? So
Yes.
they're like, are you going to get your MBA? Are you going to go work at a venture fund? Are you going to go get a job at a corporate? And I'm like, I have no idea. So
yeah, you carve your own path. There's a cool story of Carl Icahn. He's like a big, investor. He comes from a Jewish background, and his mom, I think, wanted him to go to med school, but he dropped out and he started his fund, and then he donated like $100 million to Mount Sinai, right? Which is a cool story. It's like, okay, now you're now minting hundreds of doctors basically, or enabling them to care for patients. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's more scaled.
Yeah, definitely.
What's next for your company? Like, what are you seeing on the horizon? Are there new products that you guys want to launch or get into more stores?
Yeah. So, I think for the company, I've really, done some soul searching the last few months because we haven't raised a lot of money in the grand scheme of we've raised a few million, and where typical, connected hardware companies raise tens of millions, if not more. And so it's been a blessing and a curse, as you can imagine. We've been very scrappy, very efficient, but there are times when we're stretching the dollar way further than we probably should be. But I think, given market conditions now, I got into the mindset, over the last few years of your success metric being how much money you raise. And so I don't know if I was really ever thinking about, what is the long-term potential of this business from a business perspective instead of your valuation, right? Or what your round size is. And I think because of what's happened in the last 6 months, I really had to rethink that, right? Because one, hardware is always hard to raise for. Hardware, everyone says it. But even now, it's even harder just to raise, period. And so I had to do some soul searching a few months ago where I was like, okay, either I try to go out and raise a large round that I had always expected or thought I needed to, or do I now find creative ways to sustainably grow this business, right? Like, we're looking at our contract manufacturer for a line of credit. We're, looking at some strategic partnerships. Like, I didn't really think and reevaluate how can I continue to build this business without having to spend 150% of my time raising ventures. So I think that's one, is I'm now looking at, the long-term sustainability of how we can grow and not expand our team too much and things like that. But then number two, I think is in terms of next products, we built Gen 1. You can see Gen 1 on our website. We actually have a Gen 2 launching in a few months. Learned a lot from Gen 1. Gen 1 is usually of a connected hardware product is never usually the generation that goes out to the masses, right? You learn as much
Mm,
as you can, you build a Gen 2. And so we've got a Gen 2 that's smaller, that has more design flexibility, so we can match the brand style and aesthetic of your range, and also has um, uh, is a lot easier to manufacture. And so we're working towards launching Gen 2, and at the same time doing two things. One is looking at different distribution channels. I think oftentimes, it can be a sinkhole just putting money into marketing, right, and paid advertising. And we've never
right.
really had to put many dollars into advertising. And so I'm trying to find, different distribution avenues where we can use someone who's already serving our end customers. So, for example, uh, you've got home modification companies that are going to the homes of older adults and actually giving them a suite of products that they install at once to for older adults to maintain, their independence. And so, what if I could just be included, right, as one of those products instead of trying to acquire each and every customer on our own? And so, we're looking at some more creative ways to get to our end customer. And then finally, I am doing a lot around building out strategic partnerships because in
Mm,
the long run, I think where I see this business is under the umbrella of a larger brand. And I've always thought about what we were building as a piece of a larger puzzle, right? That
mm,
ultimately appliance manufacturers, or any of these large home security and safety companies have the infrastructure to build the hardware. They're really good at it. But what
mm,
if, we could fill in a gap, right? Where your stove is the most used appliance, but it's the least connected across every brand. And
mm.
so, we've now built a very mature hardware and software infrastructure that I see in the long run being able to easily integrate into a larger ecosystem where then we can reach a much, much larger audience instead of trying to do it ourselves. And I think that takes time. And so I'm now focusing a lot of my energy on building the right relationships and getting in the right rooms with the people who understand the hardware component of this, and how we can leverage what we've built, to build something even bigger. And so those are some of the few things that I'm much more, I guess, focused on instead of let's just ship as many devices as possible. Because I mean, when you have hardware, it's expensive to do. And I think there is a right way to do hardware if you kind of break it down into baby steps. So
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, it's like if you get one strategic partnership, it's like an entire distribution channel that's unlocked, which is like awesome for consumers.
yeah.
That's really cool.
And
Um,
instead of just on that, I mean, instead of spending, all of my time fundraising and pitching to venture, I was like, I need to spend all my time pitching to the strategics that can, one, have the capital, right, and the resources. A lot of them invest in companies, a lot of them acquire companies, but who also have the distribution and hardware supply chain know-how to actually
right.
get this out the door for me. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
That's super interesting. Are that like when you guys look at like the operations, are you guys operating to the same type of metrics, let's say, as a software company in terms of like cost of distribution, order size, production costs, things like that? Like, what are some of the
No.
metrics that you guys track?
Yeah. No, it's very different to a software company because and I think this was the problem with venture is we had so many investors, comparing us or, you know, evaluating us on software metrics when you just
Yeah.
can't do that. We're going to lose every time because
Yeah.
we've got this whole other side of the business. So the things that we track are I mean, I guess similar to a software company, we do track engagement. So how often are people using our app and, how many times a day? We track all sorts of things on cooking activity. Anytime someone turns their burner on, anytime someone uses a cooking timer, anytime that auto shut off engages. And a lot of this data we are tracking to take to partners, right? Like
That's cool.
insurance providers, right, who are paying $1 billion in property damage every year because people leave the stove on. And so those things we do track on the software side. But then, we also have to track margins, cost of building materials. We don't spend much on marketing, so a lot of what we do is organic. So customer acquisition cost is something we need to track, but we haven't really put much behind that yet. And then we also do track how many people are using this for themselves versus installing this for some other family member. Because
Mm,
one thing we've thought about in terms of expanding our software functionality is, think of family sharing, reporting tools. So if you do install this for mom's probably not gonna look at the app or look at her cooking activity. But what if you could get that report? Like, I want to know that my mom is cooking every day because I know she loves to do it, but I also want to know if she stops cooking for a few days, right? And so I think that's something that we're starting to track as well. But very, very different metrics, and I think uh, different use cases and different purposes for that data too, for a company like ours.
yeah, I mean, it seems like a really complex business, but I think business complexity is a moat in some ways.
Yeah,
It's hard to replicate. So
yeah,
I think that that's actually like a really nice defensible part of the company.
yeah,
What's like your, I mean, I don't know if you can talk about this, but what's
yeah,
like your dream partner?
yeah.
Like,
I think I won't name names,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. This
but
profile.
yeah, I mean, I think more forward thinking, you know, innovative companies, but I'm also looking at, to be honest, I want to go with this business, right? I think I understand this inside and out. And so I'm also looking at, who's willing to take a bit of risk at the corporate level. I think, the risk appetite is very, very low, but who is open to new technologies, but also, who doesn't have maybe as built out of a cooking ecosystem, because I think where we can provide the most value is for a partner, where we can take them from 0 to 1 very quickly,
Mm,
versus there are some corporates out there that have put hundreds of millions of dollars behind their digital smart ecosystem. And so I think I'm sure there is potential for our technology, but I'm looking at somewhere that doesn't have something like this in the works or that's already built out. Because I think there is then an opportunity there for this to be a primary technology that they use versus somewhere where this might just sit in the background, right? And so I think actually, now that I say this out loud, I think one of my biggest criteria is this going to a company and a culture where someone, whether it's me or someone else, is actually going to push this forward.
mm,
Neither myself, our team, nor anyone who has believed in us in any shape or form, has spent the last 5 years building this just for it to sit somewhere on a shelf. And so I
mm.
think that's something that I am paying very close attention to when we do have these conversations, because sometimes you get acquired or you get partnerships just out of fear, right? Because X
Right.
company just doesn't want someone else to do it, but they might not ever do anything with it, and that's not the ideal partner for me. So
How should like a founder evaluate? Because I really admire how you came to the conclusion of like, hey, like, we don't need to raise big, dilute ourselves, do this just for like, I don't know, validation or whatever. Like how should a founder evaluate the decision to do so? Is that something that you think just came from like a pre-existing disposition, or is that
I think no. I mean, to be honest, I'm sure part of it in terms of a pre-existing trait is, I do constantly reevaluate all the time.
yeah, that's
And
cool.
I'm not afraid to to admit that I, should have done something differently. But as long as
Yeah.
I've learned from whatever decision I've made, then, that was worth it. And so, I'm always also try to be the least smart person in the room, because when you are, I think you start listening, you get a lot of perspective, but you have to be able to filter that. And I think over the last 6 months, um, I came to this conclusion simply by listening to other people. Now, not everyone's perspective is relevant to your business, so you have to do a very good job of filtering of what is
Hmm.
relevant, and what's not. But I do think just meeting a lot of people who had experience in some aspects of my journey, I think in the last 6 months helped me to come to this. But then also think I just kept hitting my head against a wall, right? Like sometimes you just have to hit rock bottom to be like, I need a change. And I was flying all over the place, Teja, to meet with all sorts of venture funds because I was still in this mindset of I need to raise a large round, but I had no idea why I was raising it. Other
I feel
than
that.
everyone kept asking me, how much have you raised? How much have you raised? And I'm like, oh my God, I need to like fix this. I need to go raise. And so I think I just honestly I got to a point where I remember it was 2 months ago, I'd, gone up to Indiana, and I was willing to move to a new city for, a couple million from a fund that, to be honest, I don't even think was the right partner, but I was like, oh my God, I will do anything for money right now. And when that didn't go through because hardware, it's expensive, et cetera, all the reasons I'd heard before, I was like, that was my low point where I was willing to move to a city where I had no family or friends. And our entire team is, in Atlanta. And I had not even thought twice about, is this the right decision for me. And I was doing anything and everything just to get money. And so I think part of it, yes, was, I was, me as a person, but I think a big chunk of it was just hitting rock bottom. And sometimes you just
Mm.
have to get there before you you realize that you need to, shift course a little bit.
It's so interesting. I mean, like valuation maximizing, trying to get the most amount of money. It's like a whole thing. And the whole tech industry, like I think even the media part of the tech industry makes its money by promoting it.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's hard
Yeah.
to disconnect from it and be like,
Yeah.
why is this actually important?
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of me even thinks like betting on yourself means that you keep your cap table clean.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
you own the whole thing or as much of it as you possibly can. So
And because of that, in the last 2 months, I've been able to make that shift, and I've been
yeah.
able to call the shots
Yeah.
with our team on what makes the best sense for this business. And I don't have like huge investors. And so I have the flexibility to do that. So I think there is a lot of value there. And definitely not something to be underestimated.
Totally. Okay, you said something in your previous question that I'm curious about. Sorry, previous response that I'm curious about. You talked about like you try to make sure that you're not the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
What are like a couple go-to questions where you can assess that quickly, like the level of intelligence on the other side? How do you find that out? Or sophistication? Maybe intelligence is not the right word, but
I can tell pretty quickly when I'm getting a different perspective.
mm,
Like you don't want someone who's always agreeing with you
mm,
because of who you are or whatnot. I think you want someone who will listen enough to then give you perspective. But I think I also only really get in rooms at this point, through warm introductions and a very targeted, like, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to XYZ. Like, can you, direct me in the to someone who does. And so I think I rely on my network now to get me in front of the smart people. And so I think I already have a baseline, understanding that this person, because they've done, XYZ in their, in the last 10, 20 years, however long it is, that they're going to have different perspective. But I think it's hard because everyone has different way of communicating. And, we met with someone the other day who, met with him for like an hour. He is very experienced, specifically in the appliance industry, but a man of very few words. Maybe said like 100 words in an hour. But to be honest, when my CTO and he was there with me, and we were like just babbling away. Um, and when we thought back, we were like, wow, every word that this man said was powerful when we thought about it. And there wasn't extraneous information. Like he knew, and maybe that's a good, another point to your question is everything he says holds meaning, right? And I think
mm,
sometimes, and I have tendency to do this too, when you get nervous or, you're not quite confident of the answer, you just start talking. You start talking a
mm-hmm,
lot.
mm-hmm,
And I think, you will know when you're in the room with people who really are mindful and thoughtful about the things that they say. I think that is a huge indication that you are in the room with the right person, versus someone that just talks a lot. And we've had a lot of those too. People that we've been introduced to, and also people who approach us who just have a lot to say, but not much. That makes sense.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Totally. No, I can think of a million stories personally where I've had that same experience.
Yeah.
What's the best way for your team to talk to you? Like, do you want the data presented first? How do you?
I want to have as with my team specifically, I want to have as organic and raw in a sense a conversation as possible, and always on video. Or in person. I know a lot
Yeah.
of people don't like that, but I think for me, I am such a people person, and you can read a lot, especially as a leader. You want to see body language, you want to see how someone's face reacts when you say something, and so much of being a people person, a leader, is adapting your conversation based on that feedback from someone. And I think that I've only fostered that from meeting so many people like all the time,
Mm,
right? And I think that's one of the benefits of not having gone into medicine for me is I've been able to realize that that is a skill set that I have and that I love to foster. So
mm,
I that's digressing a little bit, but I prefer to have, if there's an issue that someone has, or I guess something that they're presenting, I want it to be as raw and organic as possible, and live if possible too. I think the one exception to that, and we've had this before, where we might get into a disagreement, right? Or I might get frustrated about
mm-hmm.
something. I always encourage our team, and also myself, it's been a learning process for me, to take a step back. If it's not going to kill the company today, let's sit on it for 24 hours. And I think what I've realized, just even personally, is that your emotions oftentimes are temporary. And so it's good to take a step back, and see it like in 24 hours or even an hour. Do you still feel the same way? If so, let's talk about it. And so I think, depending on the scenario, there are, I think there are ways to maximize, how you talk to someone and the value of that conversation. Because what you also don't want is just having the same conversation over and over and over and over again, right?
Totally.
So I think those are
It's
some
annoying.
things that kind of guide that. But to be honest, it's been a learning experience because I've never worked in a corporate environment. I've never managed anybody. So I don't know how often I need to talk to someone. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it depends person to person too. Like some people, need more check in and need that, kind of feedback loop more than others who only want to talk to you like once a month. Right. And so I think you've got to find the right balance. And there isn't any one way to deal with, a team member, because everyone's personality is different. And it's taken me some time to figure out my leadership style. And I'm still figuring it out because, it takes a long time. So,
So, okay, is your company co-located? Are you guys remote, hybrid?
yeah. Hybrid. So half of us are in person, 2, 3 days a week in Atlanta, and then half are remote. And then we've got some contractors that are remote too. So it's a mix.
What are some rituals that you guys do to keep the remote people and the people on site like linked?
Yeah. So, I mean, our engineering team, and our, marketing team, we do daily stand-ups. And so we're always connecting in some capacity. And then, once a week, we'll do a full team, meeting. So we try to keep it as minimal as possible, in terms of just big meetings, because sometimes they can just suck time and people get
Yeah,
tired and they just want to get off. But
yeah,
I think what we also try to do on these daily stand-ups, and breaking it into just smaller groups, is you have your stand-up that takes like 5 minutes. But then we always, at least on the marketing side, I think the engineering, I think they do this too. I've overheard them, though I'm usually not on those calls.
totally.
But is we schedule it for half an hour, only because stand up is usually 5 minutes, but then we just get into just random conversation, like what someone did over their weekend, or, if I'm frustrated with something, I'll share that. And so I think having that room and space to just chat, right? Because that is the one thing about remote work that you don't get, right? Is that you don't just, just talk about something, like just anything outside of work, because once you get on Zoom, you're waiting to get off Zoom. And so it doesn't allow for that kind of, rapport to be built.
No, totally. In fact, I was just thinking about this week. It's like the remote context encourages highly efficient transactional
Yeah.
professional
Yeah.
relationships when that doesn't feel natural. Like,
Yeah.
you don't build trust.
Yeah.
You have to talk about stuff to, build that rapport. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's totally a thing.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was just talking to Abby. I was like, we need to build a studio because like trying to
Yeah.
look into somebody's pixelated eyes for an hour when you're interview is like, it's insane.
It's hard and it's exhausting, right? And people get tired, and there's pros and cons to it, but we do try to once a quarter, or once or at least twice a year, we do try to do something in person. And that
Oh,
always does
cool.
make such a huge difference. But
Totally. Do you envision you guys ever coming to the same location, like bringing all the remote folks in, or are you guys going to stay hybrid for the whole journey?
yeah, I think hybrid makes the most sense. As we do hire, we always look locally just because if you can find someone, that's great. But sometimes you just don't find that talent. And so we've always been pretty flexible about that. For us, though, especially because, a big chunk of capital is going towards physical products and prototyping, is we have to be, even more mindful about our full-time count because there are benefits, right? It's more expensive and to have full-time employees. And so, I think it's a balance. And, I've always said when it comes to physical products, our hardware team, those are all people that I do want close by. Not necessarily like right next door, but at least, once or twice a week that we can get in person. Because when you're dealing with a physical product, you want to be able to touch it. You want to be able to pass
Yes.
it around. And, during COVID, we were shipping prototypes across the country. And so I think one, you lose time and it's not very efficient. But then two is, having that physical interaction when you do have a physical product to be able to test it. Like in our office, we have a stove because we need to all be able, to test and experience the features that we're releasing. So I think depending on the role, I think, I do lean more to one side or the other. But when it comes to, for example, software engineering, we can do that remotely and it is, less expensive for us to do that. And so that makes sense for the business. But I've learned through experience that with hardware engineers or even, our CTO, I was like, I need these guys in person because it just is much more efficient and I think does make a difference when you are constantly iterating on a physical product.
I mean, I can't imagine having to ship
Oh
like
my gosh,
knobs to folks to
nightmare,
be able to. Yeah,
nightmare.
totally. Have to make sure it's. Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
sometimes you lose a package and and that prototype just costs like, $1,000. Like, what am I doing? It's, yeah.
It's yeah. No, I know. It's crazy. Okay, have you guys thought kind of intentionally about company culture? Do you guys have like a set of values? Is that an area where you spend your time, or is that organic
Yeah.
kind of?
It's starting to spend time.
Mm,
One thing
yeah.
I did realize from being completely remote until about a year ago was that we had no company culture. And again, I think because I didn't come with, that advantage of having worked in a large team setting, I didn't realize uh, how how bad it was. Not bad in terms of culture, but that we didn't have one. And I think, for example, a very simple example was I was always on video when I would come on to stand-ups, but half of our team wasn't. And what I realized was, that is culture, right? That
Yes.
where people are, without you having to say it or without you having to be in the room, that they are, kind of emulating what you do, right? And so I think now in the last, 6 months to a year after I started to delegate a lot of the technical responsibilities, I started to think a lot more about culture and, what are the values. And actually we've been doing some sessions on, what is important to us as a company in terms of hiring, but then also how does that align with how we treat our customers, right? And what our customers expect from us, because it's all interconnected. And so, to answer your question, did not place enough emphasis on it looking back because I didn't really realize what company culture meant. I just didn't have the experience, but I think over time saw the repercussions of not having company culture. And there were times where, we had a couple of engineers where I was trying to learn and figure out how do I manage these guys. There was a time where I was managing 5 engineers. I am
Jeez.
zero. I have zero. I have like negative technical, and this was
That's
when
pretty sweet though.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, it was it was very stressful because on one
Yeah.
side, you're trying to learn it. concepts and understand what they're doing so that you can measure progress, right? But then on the other side, you're also figuring out, how do I talk to these guys, right? How do I
mm,
relate to them? And as
mm,
you probably know, engineers are of a different breed sometimes. And, it was like so much that I had to learn at the same time. And there were instances where, they were, where there was disrespect. And I think it came from the fact that I had not really shown how we should be talking to people, the kind of respect that we should have shown. And to be honest, because I had never managed anyone, I didn't address it the way that I should have either.
mm, mm,
Because there was some kind of imposter syndrome there, where I was like, we had an engineer who was 30 years older than me, and I'm
mm,
like, who am I to tell this guy anything? Right.
mm,
Even though the mindset obviously should be that, look, you are an expert in what you do, and I'm here to steer the ship. Right. Is
mhm.
basically my role. But I think at the time, it was really challenging. And, it, all of it had to learn, all of it simultaneously. And, I think because of that, it might take longer, but because of those experiences, I think it's much more ingrained, because someone didn't just tell me, hey, actually, you have to do this and this. I kind of tried and failed. And because of that, I've, been able to learn from it. So yeah, it's a work in progress. And I think I'm much more focused on, building company culture, and even just the way that I talk to, and what I look for in partners too. But sometimes you have to just delegate a lot before you even have the emotional or mental bandwidth to even think about these things.
No, it doesn't show up on a P&L. I mean, I
No,
was the same way. I'm like, it's not on the P&L. What is this
right.
nonsense that people are telling me? Just like,
Yeah,
I don't know, show up, work hard, be good, and like that's the
yeah,
culture.
yeah,
That was my approach. But it's a
yeah.
whole thing, It's a whole set
It
of
is.
values. It's
And I think, and
yeah,
nobody can teach you it. I mean, you can
yeah,
read as many culture books as you want, but until
yeah,
you do it, and
yeah.
you either do it well, or hopefully you don't do it well first, because then you actually learn what not to do, and then you can do it well, right? So I think that's the mindset I've had.
No, totally. And I feel like good culture adds a lot of operating leverage
Yes.
because then people can do things without being managed
Yeah,
to do them,
totally.
you
Yeah.
know. You mentioned imposter syndrome. Has that Okay, there's a good quote that I read though about imposter syndrome, which is either you have imposter syndrome or you're a sociopath.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's like necessarily bad,
Yeah.
but like what's been your experience with it? Is it something that you felt, especially,
Yeah, totally.
being new to the tech industry and all that stuff?
Yeah, I think as a female founder in a
Yeah.
largely male dominated um, space, right? I mean, you look at all
Yeah.
of your smart home, hard tech companies, there are very few women. There are women, and they're doing an incredible job. And I know a lot of them. And it's because of them, I think, that I've, in many ways have come this far, because of that support system. But I did, especially in the early days, feel like, who am I to be building this? Like, this makes no sense. And I felt like I had to overcompensate, right? And that, I'm sure that came out, as I was pitching. And I think it took me time to, I think, ultimately come to the realization that um, I have my own skill set, and I really need to lean into that. And that skill set, and to be honest, I think this has happened in the last 6 months. So
Mm.
I've
Sweet.
dealt with the imposter stuff for a really long time. Is that, I am really good at, networking, and building relationships and getting in the right rooms. Everything else I have to give to someone else and trust that that person will take care of it. Because a lot of my
Mm,
imposter syndrome came from managing engineering talent and building
mm,
product and doing supply chain and manufacturing, of which I did not understand, enough, at least at a detailed level, to be able to do it well. And so I think a lot of that came from just not focusing on my superpowers. And so I think
mm,
first, it's important to figure out, what are you really good at? And it might take time to figure it out, especially for me, when I had never done something like this. So it took me a couple years to figure out what I'm not good at, and what I don't like doing, and what I am good
mm,
at when I do like doing. So, that's number one. Number two is, oftentimes when you feel that, imposter syndrome, you're always worried about what you don't know, right? Okay, in 6 months, I remember when we were doing our first production run, it was like 6 months away. And I was like, what if it doesn't go right? And what if this happens? And what if this happens? What if this happens? And I remember, someone telling me that it's 6 months away. Like, don't worry about it, right? But because you feel insecure in a sense, you're always worried about what you don't know. And so I have finally come to accept that I will learn what I need to learn when I need to learn it. And I think that's helped me a lot because I've proven, I think, over and over again to myself that I can problem solve and I will figure it out. If it's, I mean, there are times where I literally just to keep my sanity is it going to take the company down today? No? Okay. Let me push it to tomorrow and I'll deal with it tomorrow and I will figure it out tomorrow, or I will find someone who can help me figure it out. And so I think coming to that acceptance, and it's by no means easy, and it just comes with a lot of very sleepless nights. But I think that those two things of understanding what I'm really good at, really leaning in on it, delegating everything else, and then only, and not worrying about the things that are not in my control today, and having faith that I will figure out whatever it is, tomorrow or 6 months or a year from now, I think has helped me to get past that feeling of imposter syndrome. So.
Totally. I almost feel like the smarter you are, the more of an imposter you feel like, because you can see the differences between people's capabilities and your own. And you're like, shit, this is really tough. Why didn't I know this already?
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like, it'd be cool to be like, I'm the best.
Yeah.
I'm the best ever, but it's,
No, I thought someone has said that, like the more, even the more emotional intelligence you have too, right? I think can work against you because you are so aware of the things that you're not good at. And that takes a toll, right? Just on your like mental health. Whereas if you're like you said, if I'm good at everything and you just don't worry about it, right? Like,
totally. Have you ever been in a situation where like you're trying to do something from a management or from a leadership standpoint, but since you're so emotionally aware, you start feeling bad about what you're doing or like reprimanding something? Has that ever happened to you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think to the example I said before where I should have reprimanded someone for speaking so disrespectfully to me. And I didn't because I shied away. I was like, oh my God, how do I do it? What do I say? Like, I think, and I was like, do I even have the experience to say this to someone? So I think there were plenty of times where I felt that. And, I think even when I would pitch to, investors, when, oftentimes investors push back, sometimes because they think that they're right, but sometimes it's a test, right? Like how much conviction do you have in what you're saying? And there were times, especially in the early days, where I would cater my perspective to whomever I was talking to, even though it made no sense sometimes, right? But I was like, no, but maybe they know better than I do. And I, finally was like, no, I know this business inside and out, right? And I think the job of an investor is to fill in the gaps if, wherever they are, right? And so I think, between employees and, and also just pitching and, to whether it's venture or even, different partnerships, partnership channels, I think I always would shy away from my perspective or, what I should have said in that moment, just because I didn't feel like I had the track record or the badge, to do it, even though this is, my CTO will remind me all the time, like, this is your company. Like, you started this, like, you understand this better than anyone else. And so you have to be very confident in that. And I think this also goes to pitching too, right? You know this business. And one thing that I had to make a shift, just in terms of mindset with pitching was I would always be like, oh, this, investor has, so much money. And, the power dynamic was just so off. And I think this happens a lot, especially for first time founders. And, speaking for myself, female founders, where, you're asking for money instead of presenting an opportunity. Right. And I think that does come out in how you talk and the confidence that you portray. Right. And so I think that has fortunately changed over time, but it just, it is tough, to deal with because so much of it is just your emotional and, instability. But I think there's a lot of emotions that you have to sort through as you feel, this imposter syndrome, as you feel like maybe this person knows more than me, and just really being confident in what you know, but then also knowing what you don't know.
Well, I can sense that like hard won, battle hardened wisdom emanating
Yeah.
from my monitor, and it's awesome and it's inspiring because it's a really tough and complex business,
Yeah.
and I think you guys are serving like a really worthwhile need that probably does save lives,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
scale,
Yeah.
which is awesome.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, you can go to omekitchen.com, omekitchen.com, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I always am trying to pay it forward. I mean, I would not be here without countless people who have given me their time unconditionally, to help me not make more mistakes than I did. So you can also just send me a message on LinkedIn, and I respond to a lot of our customer service emails too. So you can also
Sweet.
just send us an email at support@omekitchen.com, and you might get a response from me too.
Thanks for listening to the Frontier Podcast powered by Gun.io. We drop 2 episodes per week, so if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice and come hang out with us again next week and bring all your internet friends. If you have questions or recommendations, just shoot us a Twitter DM at The Frontier Pod, and we'll see you next week.